All right. Welcome, everybody. For those of y'all who are new, welcome. And for those of you who have been here before, welcome back. As many of you know, this is part of a webinar series called Unpacking Coaching. And it's part of the work we do on the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. My name's Mary Louise Hemmeter, and I'm going to be your host for today. We're talking about a topic, managing coaching when work feels unmanageable, and really trying to think about how do we shift what we're doing, not what we're doing, but how we do it to be able to support people when there's a lot of other things interfering, but particularly after COVID and the events of the last several years. As usual, I am so excited to have three really amazing panelists who bring just a wealth of information, both in preschool settings and home visiting settings. And so we're just really excited to have everybody here. So let me just get to the, there. Okay, why is it not working? There we go. So I'm going to let the coach, the panelists introduce themselves. Renata.
Hi, my name is Renata Oakley. I am an SEO coach for Metro Nashville Public Schools, and I'm going to tag Lori.
That whole unmute yourself before you talk thing. Good afternoon. I'm Lori Adams. I am with the Winston-Salem Children's Developmental Services Agency, and I've been working in the early intervention in North Carolina for about 20 years. And I serve as a practitioner coach for our pyramid model work. And I also serve as a fidelity coach to family, infant, and preschool programs supporting our caregiver coaches in lots of capacities. Amanda.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Amanda Ulrich, and I work at Blakemore Children's Center. Thank you so much for your time and doing this seminar with us. I know all of us could say that we need this as much as everyone listening. Thanks so much, ML.
Thank you, guys. Y'all are in for a treat. So I'm going to just get us started by giving a little bit of background information that just to get us all situated in the content for today. So as most of you know, we do our work around a model called practice-based coaching. It's a model of coaching that we've been doing, my colleagues and I have been doing research on for over 20 years. And we know that it's effective for supporting practitioners to use a range of practices, from pyramid model practices, which obviously we're going to talk about today, but also it's been used and tested around practices, around embedded instruction practices, around behavior support practices that are more targeted, around home visiting practices. And so it's a model that works, but we know it works when you do it the way it's designed to be done, and when you do it enough that you would expect for teachers to be able to improve, expand their practices based on that support. So when I said just now, it works when you do it like it's designed to be used, that's what we call fidelity, right? The idea that you're doing the model the way it was designed. And so when we do practice-based coaching, we want to ask ourselves some important questions. One is, am I doing it as we plan to do it? And that means, am I implementing all the components of practice-based coaching? Am I doing it as much as I said I would do it? Am I doing it with all the teachers that I'm supposed to be supporting? So it's, are we doing what we said we'd be doing? And then a question we ask ourselves is it working? And is it working is answered by our practitioners making positive changes in their use of pyramid model practices. Do practitioners feel supported? Are they making progress on action plans? Are we seeing changes in children because of teachers implementing these practices? So those are the kind of easy questions. Are we doing it like we plan to do it? And is it working? But sometimes, as we'll talk about today, we have to make decisions that we're going to have to pivot and do things a little bit different. But what we always want to come back to is we might have to do things a little differently. Like I got called, like we were training people this week and someone had to miss the training because their cook called out and they had to do the cooking, right? That's what happens in early childhood programs. But how can we regroup and make sure that we get back on track? And that's kind of what we're talking about today. So when we say doing, what does it mean to do PBC with fidelity? We mean that you're doing observations of the practitioner, that you're having reflective conversations, that you're providing constructive and supportive feedback, and that you're providing resources. And we think of that as a cycle of coaching, right? And in the end, that is what matters. How you do it matters a little bit less, right? So we might have this goal, or y'all might have this goal that you've made a plan with a teacher or a practitioner around the practices they're going to implement. Maybe they videotaped it. You're going to watch the videotape, and then you're going to have a meeting in person to talk through and do reflection and do feedback and talk through it. And something happens and you can't get to that live observation or that live coaching debrief. That's okay, right? How do we pivot? How do we say, well, maybe I can't do it live, but I can Zoom with you? Or maybe it's not realistic for a teacher to be able to meet with me every week, but maybe we could meet every other week, right? So we're still delivering coaching. We're still doing all the components of coaching, but we might be doing them in a different way than planned. And that's really what we're here to talk about today, which is we could say this is the way to do it, and this is the best way to do it. And things are going to happen that are going to keep us from being able to do this. I'm always thinking about COVID and the impact. We think about the impact it had on children and families, but we also have to think about the impact it's having on our providers, right? And that means that our perfectly little planned coaching sessions might not happen the way that we thought they were going to happen, but we can still make sure they happen. And that's really what today is all about. So we always say, you may not be able to do it the way you planned, but always remember these key components and reflecting on how you can be sure you're delivering these key components, even when you're doing it in a different way than you planned. All right, so I'm going to jump into letting you hear a little bit from our panel, who you can tell are expert coaches who are all out in the field doing this hard work. And all of them are much better prepared to talk about the issues than I am. So I'm going to start by asking Amanda a question, which is, how did the pandemic force you to adapt your coaching approach?
Thank you, ML. Since I work as a classroom teacher as well as a coach, I typically, and we're teaching infants and toddlers, the approach has become a lot less formal and more informal. So one of the things that we had to do during COVID was recognize that people need extra support because of the stress that's going on in their life at the time. One example of that is just simply taking more time to get to know people. And some of the teachers that I work with,
Amanda, you're muted.
You're muted, Amanda.
thank you so much. I'm so sorry about that.
No,
Can
do
you
not
hear me
worry
now?
about it.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for your patience, everyone.
It happens. Am I on your right slide, Amanda?
Yes, ma'am. Mhm.
Okay. All right.
That's in my classroom, we teach infants and toddlers, and I'm a classroom teacher as well as a coach. So that situation for COVID, we were wearing masks, but of course the children can't. And many of the teachers had additional stress in their personal life. But one of the advantages to going through that difficult time is that it showed us on our team how important those interpersonal relationships are. And I think the thing that I was reflecting on was a lot of the extra time that it would take. And I know that sounds odd, not that one should rush through a coaching session, but I would definitely say, reflecting on my own practices, that prior to COVID, I was very methodical. And during COVID, I became a lot more sensitive to what was going on with someone. And as a result of that, it was just necessary to become more available. So one investment that we made was we started sharing phone numbers, and I had a teacher that worked with us that she was stuck at a gas station at night after school hours, but she'd run out of gas. And she had never bought a gas can. And then once you buy the can, you have to figure out how it works. And so I went to my shed and filmed how to take out the nozzle and flip it upside down and work it so that she and her 5-year-old son could get home safely. It was after dark. And that showed me that just extending kindness to someone can make a difference once we're back at work. I can't take that stress from her, but it's how we deal with it together that made a difference. A big change for me during COVID and going forward is I took on some dual roles. So I now do administrative things to help as well as teach in the classroom. But I slowly noticed that the way teachers regarded me changed because I wasn't just a peer in their eyes. And so that would be true if I'm taking care of time cards, or I have to consult the director a lot more often about things. And I've also noticed in the current time that that's brought me out of the classroom a little more, and how quickly teachers believe that I don't know what their job is like because I haven't been there every day, all day long with them. So establishing some like street credibility with people, or for them to know that I know what it's like to be in their position. That's been really important to create those connections and get to know people well enough to know how they would like to be communicated with. Renata, I know you have some good things to say about that coming from Metro as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Amanda. One thing that you stated that resonated with me was the story about the parent who you helped get gas for her car. I know one thing we had to focus on was finding unconventional ways to establish relationships and routines with our coaches. So in our particular case, one thing we kind of worked on was how we introduced ourselves. We normally did that in person. However, because of COVID, we weren't able to do that. So we would reach out via email to provide teachers a photo of what we look like, just so they could put a name to a face, and just letting them know, hey, we're here to support. And also giving them tangible affirmation. You talked about stress. I know when we came back from COVID, teachers were like, oh my goodness, what are we going to be doing? So even when you're talking to a teacher, you can, hey, I can hear the passion in your voice. Your students are so fortunate to have you in the classroom, which is kind of bouncing off the positive descriptive feedback that teachers are giving to students. We as coaches wanted to give that to the teachers we coach, and just finding ways to help them out in the classroom so that they're ready to go on the very first day of class. And I'm going to pass it to Lori, who also has some nice strategies that she's used.
So during the pandemic, a lot of agencies across the country obviously had to shift. And so in early intervention, we had to shift to virtual home visits. So this actually was beneficial in some ways with the coaching, because it sort of forced practitioners that weren't very good about coaching parents into having to do that because they weren't there being able to get their hands on the child. They really had to rely on the parent. So as far as supporting others through coaching, it allowed the practitioner coaches to sit in on visits, virtual visits, and that we could turn our cameras off and we could observe without being a distraction for the child and the family with this, new adult that they don't know being a part of the mix. Another great strategy is being able to provide real-time feedback during those focused observations using the private chat feature. You could send messages to your person that you're observing and give them that live feedback within the moment. Some states, including North Carolina and agencies, have continued with virtual visits in some capacity to accommodate families and their preferences. So one of the other things that's been helpful for us related to virtual visits and the benefits of those is it allows us to record those virtual home visits. And so as a practitioner coach, that takes it takes some of the people out of the mix. It makes coordinating the visits easier when you don't have 3 schedules to coordinate, you've just got 2. So our coach will inform their practitioner coach when they have a video that's ready, and then the practitioner coach can review that based on their own schedule and prior to when they're scheduled to meet for that reflection and that feedback. And so within our agency, we use WebEx for this, but all of our staff also have laptops. So these recordings can either be of a virtual conversation with a parent, or it could also be potentially a home visit now that we're doing those again, using a laptop to record the session, and then the practitioner coach can view it and plan their conversation sort of on their own schedule. So some other things that have been working well for us. So we actually started our pyramid work post-pandemic. So we were already doing a lot of coaching, but our pyramid model work began actually during the pandemic. So we jumped right in having these virtual options. So some of the things that have worked well for us, though, in implementing that and keeping the coaching going is setting real clear expectations. So we've really made that part of our job description. So as we're bringing in new staff, they start receiving training early on in their employment with us. So they're paired with a mentor coach to begin building their family coaching skills, even before they start training and rolling into our pyramid model practices. And so some other things that we do is just setting real clear timelines. We have a very structured approach where we've laid out what those timelines are and what our expectations are for staff. Everybody in our agency is being coached by someone. So we have it really embedded into our staff's job responsibilities. And so if they're not following through with those timelines and getting their videos done when they need to, and those conversations, having those regular conversations for those focused observations and things, then it really becomes a supervisory issue because it's so embedded in our work and our everyday and part of the expectations. So along with that, of course, the accountability is really important. So we have, as I mentioned, we have staff at various phases of their coaching and fidelity. So their mentor or practitioner coach is responsible for ensuring that they're submitting those logs and videos in a timely manner. And as ML mentioned earlier, it's really important to ensure that over time the practices are being delivered as intended. So as staff reach fidelity with their pyramid practices, that's actually one of the newer things that we've been having conversations about, is how to make sure that we're keeping it how it's supposed to look. So we're rolling those folks as they finish and reach fidelity with pyramid into quarterly coaching groups, where they can continue to receive that support around those practices on a quarterly basis, and have the opportunity to learn from each other. They were real uncomfortable with this initially, but we know how valuable those learning opportunities are. So as we've actually just gotten through our second round of those, and I think folks are starting to see it's not as bad as they thought it was going to be. We're real fortunate at our agency that we have 2 fidelity coaches who are certified through the Family Infant Preschool program. And so we observe and provide support also to our practitioner coaches. So they are also getting feedback in the same way that they're providing feedback to try to just keep us all on the same page. And we actually also coach each other. So, and a lot of our coaches, something else that was mentioned earlier, it was Amanda talking about how you have to keep credibility. So most of our practitioner coaches are actually coaching on multiple levels. So for example, as a fidelity coach, I'm coaching our practitioner coaches, but I also coach some caregiver coaches, and I also coach families. So I'm actually coaching at all the different levels. So I think that is real important as well. And then just a couple other things. We try to make sure that we're giving our staff frequent practice opportunities. So we've built in some other practice times besides those coaching conversations related to their observations. So we have implemented something we call pyramid pointers groups that happen on a monthly basis, where we take time as a group to dig into some of the pyramid resources and have practice opportunities around using those. And also we embed some of that into our monthly staff meetings with what we call a coaching corner, where we just provide some other action practice opportunities within our monthly meetings.
Wow. Thank you guys. And Amanda, I think one thing that struck me while you were talking was how y'all created a culture where coaching is a good thing, right? Where coaching something that everybody gets and it isn't seen as punitive. And I just love the context that y'all created. All right, we're going to move on. I know there's some questions. We're going to try to get to a few of those in a minute, but I want to talk a little bit about, Amanda talked a little bit about technology, but what are the other ways that technologies supported your coaching efforts? Renata, you want to take that?
Sure, I'll take it. Personally, technology was and is a saving grace. It also allowed me to model for teachers some of the pyramid model practices that I wanted them to do. For instance, we try to get teachers to record themselves so we can reflect. But with COVID, what we did was actually have teachers record so I could provide feedback when I wasn't able to come into the classroom, and we held virtual meetings. We had multiple methods of communication, and technology actually helped me increase that bilateral communication. I know we want teachers to be able to send messages and families to actually respond to those messages or send messages in, but by texting teachers, doing phone calls, using GroupMe apps like Remind, it allowed me and the teachers to have back and forth conversations with each other. But most importantly, there was a database that we created because we couldn't be on site or on the campus. There was a database that had like frequently asked questions that teachers would often ask. And it also had resources that teachers would likely use that I wasn't able to provide to them physically since we weren't able to come into the building. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to pass it to Amanda. Yes, it is Amanda. I'm going to pass it to Amanda to talk about some more technology resources.
Thank you, Renata. One thing that worked for our school is we created some Google Sheets. Oh, help me. Am I on mute again?
You're good, Amanda.
Oh, am I on? Okay, thank you so much. As you could tell, technology is not my strong suit, but we were able to do things that are simple, and our school was given Google Chromebook, so that's we don't have a fantastic processing computer. We don't have access to a lot of things that the tech world does, but the Google Sheets works well for us because we needed to simplify life to make it, to reduce the stress and the workload on teachers. So traditionally we would fill out like a BIR, and then we would fill out an incident report, and then we would still update on Brightwheel to a parent if something happened that day. So for challenging behavior, and I've heard a lot of scenarios about challenging behavior increasing during and after COVID, we needed to track a lot more behaviors to help prevent them. So instead of having like 3 different places to put that information, the teachers now make an incident report on our childcare app called Brightwheel, which is the main method of communication to families. And when there is an incident, they just simply ask who, what, when, where, and why. They answer who, what, when, where, and why something happened. And then from there, we're able to put that into a Google form or Google Sheets. And that's helped us a lot communicate as a team, have data to draw from, as well as when we have our family and teacher conferences, we can see patterns and work to prevent those patterns. The other thing that we did is when we began staffing after COVID, we hired people that had never worked in childcare or classroom settings. And one of the women that worked with us was an expert at data. And that was a big blessing to us because we could learn from her and then simplify it so everyone could do it. So I was really happy to have easy ways to answer those questions, but also to extend more communication to a family or facilitate conversations and meeting times. And I think it's back to you, Emil.
Okay. Amanda, I so appreciate you talking about y'all don't have a lot of technology, because I think one thing that's really cool about this panel is that we have childcare represented, we have public school represented, we have home visiting represented. And I think how we do this in those different programs is going to be really different. And I think what's so nice is how y'all have maximize the resources you do have, even though your resources are sometimes really different. So thank you for that. All right. So now I want to talk a little bit about, I kind of mentioned this at the beginning, but I think one thing that's happened since COVID, maybe, I sometimes think that COVID just highlighted issues that we already have in early childhood, but I think that since COVID, there's been an increase in teacher reported stress. I think it's always been stressful. Maybe COVID made it a little safer to talk about it being stressful, and staff turnover issues are, I think, rising. And so I'm wondering how you've adapted your coaching to kind of meet practitioners where they are, to recognize that people are stressed. That our staffing is an overload sometimes. How have you tried to address that? And I think, Renata, I'm going to hand this off to you.
Emil, I agree with you wholeheartedly. COVID did allow teachers to actually feel comfortable with addressing their stress, because I think back to before COVID, where there was this swinging pendulum where we felt like we were doing things over and over. However, once we returned from COVID, I know for the district I work with, there was a new initiative that teachers had to use. So they were stressed with, okay, the students are back in the building. We have to wear a mask. I have a new curriculum that I need to do. How am I going to get this done? And so as a coach, my main priority was to get teachers to see, hey, it all meshes together. We're going to embed it. We're not going to reinvent the wheel. We're going to take what the curriculum had and we're going to overlap it and embed it with those different social emotional competencies to help our students. So just getting them to see where you can use what you already have in place to embed the different skills or the different action plans related to our coaching.
Oh,
and we're going to go to the next slide.
Yeah, sorry.
You're okay.
There you go.
So speaking about those new with the new curriculum, helping teachers brainstorm about different strategies or methods they can use. And then like just recording yourself, being vulnerable to let teachers know the best thing to do is to try. If we make quote unquote a mistake, we'll learn from that mistake. So it's not technically a mistake, but more so of a learning experience. And then I've also learned that it's important sometimes to just let teachers talk. One way I kind of reduce my own stress is to just vent and talk. So I found myself like, let them talk, only provide feedback or a comment if they request one, because we want our teachers to feel like they are actually being heard. And last but not least, just getting teachers to work as an effective workforce and collaborating and talking amongst each other so they can actually be a support system for each other. I know Lori has some information she can share that deals with strengths. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes,
One thing
we
before I
forgot
get to
about
you, Lori. Okay, what you see on the screen is basically an action plan. Oftentimes action plans align with like the different indicators related to TPOT. This was an action plan that I actually did with a teacher that was focused on self-care. This teacher had trouble saying no. So like once a week, she was just piling extra things on her plate. So we took the action plan that we used for our focus observations and we turned it into a self-care action plan for her. And so we basically wrote the goal was, which was her caring for herself, and the expected outcome. We wanted her to take a break, ask for help when she needed it, and say no when she knew she truly couldn't accomplish what was being asked of her. And as we always do, we put explicit. And we also did a timeline because we know with stress, it's easy for things to go flying out the window. So this plan was actually a checks and balance for us to make sure that we were helping her learn to care for herself.
I love this so much, Renata, that I'm glad we didn't forget to talk about it, because I think it's important to not just have self-care be something that we say is important, but to really emphasize it. Okay, Lori.
Okay, so similar to what Renata was talking about, in an effort to not stress people out, as I mentioned earlier, we rolled into our pyramid work during the pandemic. So we didn't want our staff to feel like we've been spending the last, 5 to 7 years at that point, learning this family-centered coaching practices. And now we're going to shift and we're going to do something different. So we really focused hard on the way we presented all of that information in an effort to not stress out our staff. So we focused a lot on helping them see the links between the practice-based coaching and what they already knew. And so it wasn't something new. We were just using what we were already doing and we're shifting it to really focus on that social emotional piece. So we focused a lot on that buy-in, and some of the things that we did to help ensure that our staff had the knowledge and the tools that they needed for that implementation was providing some additional trainings that were specific to social emotional development for birth to 3-year-olds so that they felt like they had the information they needed. We broke down the pyramid practices into smaller pieces and did some additional trainings with a lot of practice opportunities. And a lot of the practice opportunities were related to using what you already know, but how does it look when you're looking at the social emotional piece? And so we just really stressed, that we're not shifting, we're just adding on and building. And so one of the resources that you got is just a list of open-ended questions. That's just an example of some of the brainstorming activities that we did with our staff and some of those trainings related to, how to ask the questions. So what would the questions look like if you were wanting to gather more information about social emotional development? And so they were able to just practice and come up with this really great list of questions. And so you have an example of that is part of the resources. And so we just, by using what we already had in place, it felt familiar to our staff. And so we feel like that really was helpful in our implementation. And then the staff buy-in. So the staff buy-in was really important, but we also knew it was important to have our practitioner coaches bought in because they were already supporting. And so they'd been supporting staff using a particular set of fidelity tools, and we had a process in place. And so now we're adding new tools and new indicators and new things. So we didn't want to stress them out either. And they all have other roles within our agency. So we knew it was really important to consider the time commitment. So as our implementation team was rolling things out, we really relied a lot on feedback from our practitioner coaches about the tools and the processes. And so similarly, we took our fidelity tools that we were currently using and we sort of morphed them with the pyramid fidelity tools so that it wasn't now you have extra tools, but we just made it all fit together as best we could. And one of the things I like about Renata, what Renata was just sharing, is how they use their action planning for self-care. We sort of adapted our action planning document to make it match what our IFSPs look like the outcome pages. And so similarly, it felt really familiar to staff. They're used to asking parents these questions. And so now they're using those same process of setting the goal and what's it going to look like and how do we know we've met it. It looked real familiar. And we felt like that was really helpful. And then we also just created a checklist that just outlined the whole process. These are the timelines, as we mentioned earlier, the importance of that accountability and keeping things on track. We linked in all the tools they needed, so it was really easy to find the things they needed and hopefully make that process flow easily once we got started. Okay, and so in doing all of that, you have the processes and you have the tools and but it's also really important to be flexible. So in order to keep the flexibility is really important in order to keep the coaching going. So we're always seeking feedback from staff, and it's really important to evaluate the work you're doing. And the pyramid folks will tell you that, as ML was talking about earlier, this is kind of what it looks like, but it's okay to take it and adapt it in some way, shape, and form to make it fit your program. So because coaching is an interaction style, it really should be embedded into all the work and not extra work. So we use this approach when staff present problems to build their capacity. So we're not just coaching with families, we're coaching with our staff. This helps to decrease their stress. Hopefully, some of them are on here today. Hopefully this helps decrease their stress and also helps them problem solve more effectively. And then we feel like when we coach them, then they feel valued when we make changes that are based on the feedback that they gave. So seeking out that feedback and then using that information is really important. And so our practitioner coaches meet monthly for updates about what supports we need, and also just the trends we're observing in our conversations, if there are training needs, if we need more practice opportunities. And it's just really important to be flexible with the process and to make changes based on the feedback that you're getting from your group. If something's not working or if it's too much, then think about how to shift it to make it fit and to make it doable. So just one example of that is one of the things that we've recently added, and actually the PMI folks added it even to our practitioner log as an option for us, is because our staff already had experience with what we call coaching logs, where you basically transcribe a conversation. We recognize that a lot of times really great or similarly really challenging conversations happen when you're not videoing. And so that gave our caregiver coaches an opportunity to get support around conversations that they weren't planning, but that were really good examples of some of the things that they're working towards. And so we have a log that they can use. And so we added that as an option to the video observations to gather some of that information. So again, it's just really important to be flexible during the conversation. So just because you planned, I think Renata mentioned that earlier, sometimes people need to talk. So if you've planned the conversation and you have your ideas about how you plan to support this person you're coaching, but they bring other priorities to the conversation and to the table that day, then it's important to be flexible and to support them in the ways that they feel like they need it. So Amanda, what are some of the ways that you have supported your staff?
Oh, thank you. I'm definitely going to take some of your suggestions to heart. I love what you're saying about the pyramid pointer groups. I'm going to bring that back to my school, Lori. The ways that we've supported our staff, of course, I don't know if a lot of other centers experienced this, but I've heard that there was some turnover after COVID for lots of people. And so in our school, it's not just a lead and an assistant. There's multiple people because we're a mixed age classroom. So often a new person doesn't know where to go and what to do and at what time. So a class matrix was a tool that was handed to me by my coach, Abby Taylor, and that has been very, very instrumental. We use it now when we hire people, and that helps set expectations. But then when it comes to coaching, it's easy to see, just like being a player on a team, where your part affects others. And so that's, for me, very helpful and very visual. And I saw several questions in the chat box about materials, especially the self-care action plan or not. So Victor was telling us that those will be at the end, everybody. One of the other things we started to do, because we hired people that moved to Nashville, and before they moved, they had an interview on Zoom. So they're coming to our city from a different state or a different city. We would put emails together of free fun events like come explore the city, because if you're lonely, it's really hard to feel productive at work. That really can affect your day. So that helped kind of overcome a barrier. The other barrier that we had to coaching was that teachers in our classroom had considerable anxiety after COVID, and I would say I still see that some today. So one of the methods I use is just a simple bridge statement. I've felt that way before, and I've found blank worked for me. I think it's easy to be dismissive, especially when you hear things that could sound challenging, but everyone has felt afraid of something at one time. And another method that we use that came from the challenging behavior training that's on the PRISM website, I believe it's session 5, it talks about reframing children's behavior. But that was very helpful with teachers to see a situation differently, that it's not threatening, that the risk is lower now, and to change their perspective. Another issue that came up for us, and this is for me having dual roles at home and at work, I'm a caregiver to 2 elders in my home. And there were simply just some times where I wasn't as present at work as I would like to be. But I could leave a plan in place through text messages. In our childcare app has a text component that's just to staff directly. I could email a class matrix, especially if there was going to be a change. And I felt that for me, that was helpful, but that was a struggle for the staff sometimes if I wasn't as present as I had been prior. So often what we found is that at a certain point, we looked for and found an external coach through Signal Centers in Tennessee. It's called CCR&R. And that was very helpful to have someone in my place that can continue to support our staff. They may do it differently, and it took a little bit for us to stay in communication, but it continued to happen. And I felt that I saw teachers grow in a way that they wouldn't have grown if it was just me. When I came back after that, one of the things I've been reflecting on is my role as a coach versus my role as a trainer. When we have new people in class, I do have to train, especially the first 2 weeks, how to do a diaper change, all the 10 steps. But that's very procedural, and coaching is very relational. And so for me mentally, to overcome that barrier so that it's not so functional, that it's more fluid and natural. So one of the ways that I did that is back to the check-ins and that word that you used at the beginning, ML, about supportive. What's supportive for that person? So often I would begin a conversation by sharing something not too in depth and not too superficial, but just kind of middle of the road, that I'd be comfortable with them knowing about me, and see if they would share something about themselves. And then from there, building on that. I'm a big believer in that it has to be pertinent to that person. Everyone's not motivated by the same thing. So those are some of the things that we've done to help support staff and try to make the workplace more pleasant and a place people want to go to every day.
I don't know about everybody listening, but I sure would like for all of you guys to be my coach. Amanda, just some of the things you just said are so just on target about how we support adult learners, right? So, all right, we are running out of time, but I'm going to ask each of you to share any final thoughts or strategies you have that would be helpful. And I know we have a slide for each of you, but you can feel free to just take your minute or so to share whatever you want to share as a kind of final thought. Lori.
Okay, so I think respecting people's time is really important. So it's really important that if you're going to be coaching someone else, that you take the time you need to prepare for the conversation, so that you can make the impact that you want to make. So we encourage our staff to sort of think through what the coaching opportunities are in this conversation. And then from that, like, what is the most important thing you want them to walk away with? And then plan your conversation sort of backwards. What do you want the takeaway to be? And what can you ask to start your conversation that's going to take you where you want it to go? And that way you make sure you get to that place in a succinct amount of time. We don't want them to be 45-minute conversations. We want them to be, 15 to 20-minute conversations. And then similarly, to make the most impact, making sure that you're not just supporting people around this interaction with this family, but you're helping them think big picture. So what does this look like across your practice? This is what it looked like here, but how do you do that with other families? And what ideas do you have to use that in other interactions? Amanda?
That's a great point, Lori, about what says respect. Respecting someone's time is respecting them. For us, I realized that because things had become so informal, we needed to go back to some structure. So having meetings again. I also realized that I can be kind of shy and rely too much on modeling. But in our practice session, ML pointed out that it's not just the method I'm comfortable with, but what would speak best to that person. And that's a very good point. I had some teachers in a friendly way let me know that they may not literally say the script, but that concept would be conveyed in the style that they saw best. And that's a way that I can be more respectful of the teachers I work with, to not be so literal, and to allow them to problem solve it in the way that works for them and the children. Renata, I know you had some thoughts about this as well.
Uh-oh, Renata's frozen.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Renata,
Yep.
can you try maybe just blurring your background and see if that cuts a little bit of because I think that's the third time so far.
Okay. Is it okay if I just proceed and not move?
Yes. Yeah, go ahead. You're good, Renata.
All right. So basically, I'm piggybacking off of both Lori and Amanda. Lori mentioned strategies about the planning and respecting people's time. And mine is just basically that time management. When you do that planning and when you have those strategies that Amanda has in place, you can help with time management, because sometimes you don't have those 15 or 20 minutes. Sometimes you may have 5 minutes. So if you have that action plan and you know this is specifically what I'm going in for, that observation, then you know exactly what it is you're looking for. If the teacher's like, hey, I can't debrief today, you have alternative methods. Hey, we can debrief via email or the phone, and just work with the teacher again to plan those embedded opportunities. So you're getting a 2-for-1 and not necessarily having to find different components of the day to find the information you're looking for in the action plan. And I'm gonna pass it back to
Oh,
Emma.
Y'all are so good. Lori, I'm going to put you on the spot and I need a real quick answer, but somebody wants to know how you deal with confidentiality when recording visits with families.
Okay, so we have a consent that that parents have to sign in order for us to record the session. We
And
do
then
also, sometimes we don't record them though. Sometimes I will actually just sit in on the session and I'll type it like notes as it's happening. But if we're going to record it, the family has to sign a video consent.
Okay, perfect. And then one other question for you, Lori. You mentioned something about a timeline for new staff coaching.
Mm-hmm.
They're asking, like, do y'all have like a written timeline, a written plan for how you bring new teacher or new practitioners on to coaching?
We do. We have a whole coaching checklist that we use, and there are multiple steps because there's a lot of different pieces. There are certain trainings they have to have, and you have to have this before you have that. And a lot of that is North Carolina requirements with our family-centered coaching. And then we are actually just now at the point where we're going to be having to figure out how to roll our new people into pyramid training. So
Okay.
I can't even tell you what that looks like. There was a big group that got it all at once. And now the people that haven't had it, that's like our next step is how are we going to pull them into our pyramid work? Yes.
All right. Well, we don't have enough time to talk about this in detail, but I think Lori, what Lori's bringing up is this idea about how intentional their coaching process is. And that I think, like, I'm thinking about when you have new teachers who are going to get coaching or new practitioners, how important it is to help them understand that coaching is this safe, supportive process. Like when I hear the three of y'all talking, I'm like, I want coaching, right? But that's not what everybody's experiences have been with coaching. So one last thing I want to do before I turn it over to Victor to sign us off is there were a bunch of questions about dosage, and it's impossible to cover them all, but I'll just say that dosage is a hard question because I think it depends. It depends on where the teacher is at the beginning. If they're a new teacher or an experienced teacher, it depends on what other program supports are in place. It depends on what options you have for delivering coaching. And so if you're delivering expert coaching in person, on a regular basis, you can only do about 4 or 5 teachers a week because that's what it takes to get out there and do an observation, do a debriefing session, prepare, and do all that during school time, right? But that's not enough, right? That dosage is not going to be enough to get all of the teachers in a program. So it's a complicated answer that I believe we actually have a handout that we'll try to get up on the resource page that talks about how to make those decisions.
All right. Thank you so very much to all of our panelists for their wonderful insight. Your feedback is very important to the work that we do. Please remember to provide your feedback on this webinar with our post-webinar survey by typing the web address shown on this slide into your internet browser or scan the QR code. Your certificate of attendance will appear once you submit your survey. We invite you to visit our website, challengingbehavior.org, to sign up for our upcoming webinars, access recordings, download pyramid models, and more. Thank you to our funder for making this webinar possible. This concludes our webinar. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.